This is Musical Talk.
Musical Talk.
The UK's independent musical theatre podcast.
Musical Talk, the UK independent musical theatre podcast.
Hello, welcome to Musical Talk. I'm Nick Hudson, sitting across from the legendary Jeremy Sams. Hello, Jeremy. How are you?
There. Very good indeed, thank you.
We are at the beautiful Patrons Room at the Royal Academy of Music.
It's posh, isn't it?
It's all right, you know, there's no food or drink or anything, but we'll survive. Tonight, Robert and I are going to see a musical that you've been involved with. Tell us, I know nothing.
You know nothing.
As the waiter once said. So.
The people who know about Amour are a rather small constituency because it ran for precisely 2 weeks on Broadway. In fact, if you go to Joe Allen's in New York, you'll see my son once was there. He came back from the loo, he said, Dad, your name's on the wall here. And I say, yeah, with all the other flop musicals.
Just now graffitiing your name on the wall.
So it ran for a couple of weeks on Broadway, and it was a delightful little thing, based on a French show called Le Passe-Muraille, music by Michel Legrand. And I saw it in Paris. This is years ago now. And the American producer, now no longer with us, the legendary Jerry Schoenfeld, who ran the Schuberts, was really keen on this show. And I've always been very keen on Michel Legrand, who wrote The Umbrellas of Cherbourg, which and sort of soundtrack of my youth. It's just fantastic.
And the one recently at the Haymarket, which, well, not that recently.
Marguerite.
That was
him. That was the Umbrellas of Schoenberg, if you like. That was a collaboration in many ways.
That's very good. I write that one down.
Just popped into my head. And what I remember most about watching Le Passe-Muraille in Paris, this tiny theatre, is I sat next to Michael Jackson, which rather strange.
As one does.
Well, actually, he had a bodyguard on between me and him. And this is a very sweet little piece. It's about a man, it's based on a French book by a man called Marcel Aimé, and it's quite well known in France, about a man who one day wakes up and decides he can walk through walls. And that's
what in Ghost.
Well, exactly. The difference is he's alive. And so in a sort of Kafkaesque way, he suddenly wakes up and finds he can do this thing. He's in love with someone, and maybe it's the wanting to be seen, noticed, etc., because he's a sort of bourgeois, normal civil servant. Anyway, he walks through walls and decides to become a jewel thief and a hero to impress this girl he's in love with, and he gets arrested and put in jail and walks through the walls of the jail, and so on, eventually finds the girl he wants. So I worked on this thing, did various versions of it in workshops in New York. James Lapine came on board to direct it.
And what was your role in it?
My role was in the first instance as translator, because it had a complete French text.
Because to say you're a quadruple threat would be an understatement. You've done everything, and not everyone, but you've done every role possible in theatre, haven't you?
Choreography is not, and wigs, not very strong on those. So I translated this thing and wrote lyrics in English for the French text. But then it became clear that we needed to rewrite it anyway. So Michel wrote a lot of new songs, and I wrote the English text for that. That was massively pleasurable, because music just pours out of this man. And we would generally start, his rule is if a song isn't written by lunch, it's not going to happen. So we'd start at breakfast. We'd work on song after song after song. Basically, it's not so much more like a traditional musical, it's actually more like an operetta. Offenbach is the model. He loves his Offenbach, and people don't really know the Offenbach, apart from the fact it influences GNS, and GNS is around here as well. So it's a completely sung through, rather charming, rather delightful piece. Slight, whimsical, all those things that don't make for Broadway blockbusters. Trouble with Broadway is there's no off-Broadway, really. To make sense of money in a big show, you have to do it in a big theatre. And if you don't sell a lot of tickets, you're taken off. And that was that. That was in about 2002, God help us. Then there was trouble with publishers and rights and God knows what else. And literally, it's the first time it's become free. So since I've been working quite a lot here at the Royal Academy, I thought what a great thing for the kids to do. So we got all the rights together, and it's now having its, as it were, second outing since Broadway. So it did 17 performances on Broadway. It'll do 4 here. And the sky's the limit.
3 weeks total of a run.
Absolutely right.
I mean, it's amazing being able to take a show to a drama school, because they're able to offer so much.
Yes.
in so much that you get to work with wonderful talent, but also the students get to work with wonderful talent as well, and it's a real learning experience.
That's the most important thing. The most important thing is that the students should have things, a climbing frame to climb on, have fun on, and to expand on. And this is a particularly wonderful course here. It's going through a bit of a new lease of life. It's been taken over by new people, and it's very much now turning into an acting course, which interests me massively because I'm hugely interested in where theatre and music, I used to say sort of coalesce or overlap, and I'm now more and more convinced there's actually really one thing. If I could find a word for it, like meter or thusic or coalap, I'd use it. But actually, this is more and more a drama course for people who can sing. And what's great is particularly these students here, they've become so available to theatre experience. And, they come in as singers. So that's really something that's now basically a tool in their box. The fact they've got beautiful voices is an acting tool. No more than that.
But you might also have the added bonus in the future of actor musicians as well, which is quite a popular thing.
Yes. Absolutely. They don't do a course here for acting musicians. They do.
They might be able to play instruments, and you can still maybe involve that in the piece.
Yeah, no, that certainly seems to be the way. It's sort of, that's something that's come out of need rather than anything else. But many, necessity is the mother of invention. And for many years when I worked on shows, the arithmetic was a musician cost twice an actor. So, if you've got 2 musicians and 3 actors, that's 7 people. So if you can combine those salaries, of course it makes utter sense.
So do we have an orchestra tonight or a band?
We do have an orchestra. Actually, the Broadway Orchestra was originally written for 3 instruments. It's fascinating. In Paris, there's no real history of musicals. It really exists. They have musical comedies and operettas, but actual...
And Moulin Rouge and...
yes, and Moulin Rouge and shows and spectacle and things like that. But not actual musicals. And there's no real history there.
But yet the French have written the world's longest running musical, which is fascinating.
Yes, although the French plus some help, I think. But yes, absolutely right. I was working years ago at the Royal Shakespeare Company as musical director, and they sent me a copy of this thing from France called Les Miserables and said, we're thinking of putting this on, what do you think? And I said, don't touch it, you'll lose your shirts on this one, which is something I remind people whenever they send me a show for my opinion. I think, well, that is my track record. I'm a man who didn't spot Les Miserables.
My friend, and I presume yours, Jonathan Cohen, heard that's the same French demo and said he much preferred it in French. It had a much more emotional feel to it.
Yeah, but actually what Trevor did, which is so... And Trevor made that, Trevor and John, and really turned it into a theatre piece as opposed to a concert piece.
Now, I want to talk about where we are. I mean, the hands of gods are smiling down upon us. For you and I are both musicians here at the Royal Academy. Tell us a bit more about this place for anyone who might not know about it.
Well, there are a few rather wonderful colleges of music in London. There's the Royal College and the Royal Academy, and where I studied, which is the Guildhall School of Music. And they are centres of excellence. This is really old, and they've got locks of Mozart's hair they'll show you, and all sorts of wonderful things like that, and beautiful concert halls. And what's great for the music theatre course here is that you're amongst other musicians. But as I really want to stress, most importantly, people come in as musicians and as singers, and I hope. I've been working here a lot this year. I hope go out as actors.
And you use that term music theatre. Is there a difference between that and musical theatre?
Gosh, people's snobbery changes. There is always snobbery, and there's always prejudice, and there's always fashion. But actually, as I said, more and more, I'm just convinced that these distinctions are not remotely interesting. Opera, musicals, musical theatre,
pop opera.
Really, telling stories through music is what we're all doing, and how that works, or telling stories using music is what we're all doing. And actually how that works is in 100 different ways. Trundle on working, the more I'm interested in the musicality of a play, in the theatricality of a music piece, in the way in opera the tectonics of music push the story forwards, the way in musicals the same things apply. All that's different, I think, is, 2 things. The audience, but mostly the economics. Musicals, it's in the DNA of the pieces. Musicals are a way of making money. Operas are a way of spending money.
It's a good way of putting it.
And those two things have been true since opera was invented, since musicals were invented. And weirdly, those will always be in the DNA of the form. And actually, they do things very differently in both those forms. And having worked in opera quite a lot recently as well, it's a different world. And the way they spend money is a different way. And it is a showcase of quite a different sort. Musicals, at their root, this is why Stephen Sondheim thinks that Stephen Sweeney Todd is a failure, because it didn't make money on Broadway. And he's not joking. That's the point of a musical. At some level, it's got to make sense, because it is, and that's the real difference. And those differences are nothing to do with the thing itself at all. They're to do with what the purpose of them are, and the economics. I worked very hard on operas and did a translation this year for the Royal Opera House, Brecht, Weil, Mahagoni. Worked extremely hard on it, took forever. They did 6 performances. I mean, even Amour got more performances than that.
But you have to treat every project as if, even if it has 1 performance or it has 5 million performances, it has to be the best thing anyone could ever do, doesn't it?
Of course. I mean, but that goes without saying, even if there's no performances, no one does anything other than their very best. But, and second-guessing the public opinion is a really dodgy thing. If we could do that, then people just can't. They like to think they can.
Now, for me, you've been involved in a couple of big projects. I want to first talk about Chitty Chitty Bang Bang.
Right.
Which I saw when I was 18,
really?
Which was a wonderful experience.
No wonder you grew up strange.
Richard O'Brien, Michael Ball, we've had Emma Williams on the show, just a wonderful...
That was Emma's first job.
Yes, and Sherman Brothers wrote you songs.
Yep. Working with the Sherman Brothers was the thing that comes to mind straight away, which was just wonderful, particularly because the people who put Chitty on were the Broccolis, the Broccoli family, as in James Bond. And they do things differently. Our first production meeting, for example, on the show, there was a meal at San Lorenzo's with a printed menu saying Chitty Chitty Bang Bang production meeting menu. Jesus, normally you get a pizza and half a beer at a production meeting. I mean, they just did things in style because they literally didn't know how else to do them, because that's Hollywood royalty, So I would go to Los Angeles and be treated like I've never been treated before or since, in terms of hospitality and the cars that were waiting. And we'd go to the Sherman's house, which is next door to Ringo Starr's house. I'd met Ringo Starr, and then we'd go to work in Fred Astaire's old house around the piano. And they were just wonderful, and they would tell great stories of Disney and what that was like. But also, because that was a really sweet little show, and watching these guys...
Little show.
Big show. Big show. It started off on the back of an envelope, like all the best shows, and then ended up huge. Well, that was another thing, because anything I put down, like we should do this, and we should, the child catcher should disappear through the roof of the thing.
Why
like
not?
That. And the stage should be invaded by 20 dogs, whatever it is. The Broccolis being the Broccolis say, yeah, we can do that. Because
do you think it would happen the same nowadays?
Well, funnily enough, it is happening right now. There's a new revival happening from the West Yorkshire Playhouse. I think it would be produced by people who've got more of an eye on the bottom line. If you're the Broccolis and run James Bond, the profit margins doesn't have to quite make sense in the same way, which was glorious and great. What was nice about the Shermans was they told me a couple of lovely things. One of which is that, one I've learnt since, is with working with Disney, anytime Disney didn't like something they wrote, and they would often write songs for Mary Poppins or for Jungle Book or for Chitty or for hundreds of other things, exactly right. And he would always say the same thing, which was, it's a great song, boys, it's a swell song, just not for my show, which is something I've absolutely learned.
He never gave praise either.
No, but the praise was to have it in the show. And actually, sometimes I think about this movie music, actually. Someone says, what's a good movie cue? A good movie cue is one that gets into the picture. That's how it works. And the other memory I have of that, which was so lovely, is that I wanted a number in Act 2 when I said, we need something where the kids get together, and it's like, it's the Children's Crusade, or it's if we pull
teamwork can make a dream work.
That's exactly what happens.
Such a Sherman Brothers song, though.
One of them said, do you mean something like teamwork can make a dream work? And I said...
He's had that title in his head for years.
Well, he must have done. That rhyme, even, teamwork and a dream work, I've never come... I mean, I know I know a lot of shows and a lot of songs, and I've never heard that before. And it was just so wonderful, felicitously, that hit. So, yeah, you bet, that's what we want.
So they worked together, which was a very rare thing for them.
Well, they did and they didn't. There was always two in the room. I mean, that you've probably seen the documentary about them called The Boys. So that was what you might like a long marriage.
But Richard lived in London, didn't he? Or...
He eventually did. He moved to London when Chitty opened.
So Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, and then came The Sound of Music, the first reality TV show thing, wasn't it?
It was the very first. And weirdly, I've done a few more since then. Then we did Sound of Music in Canada. And then we did Wizard of Oz here in London, then Wizard of Oz in Canada as well. So I've been in every single case. The winners were really, really wonderful. And the reason I think for this is, and I was extremely dubious about it, and also as a director, you're going to be a bit of a control freak. In fact, you're going to be a lot of a control freak. So the idea that you can't cast your leading part was a lot to take on.
And also that you could tell the stress was on Andrew as well, wasn't he, in these TV shows?
Did he look stressed?
He walked out at one point.
How could you possibly notice that? It was a completely unknown area, and weirdly, because it was unknown, it created a sort of panic around every part of it, all of which I've sort of now forgotten, because what actually happened was Sound of Music was a really big success and did terribly well in the Palladium, and weirdly is still around. It's right now it's about to open in Australia, and it's been in various touring versions, that production, for a good 10 years, if not more. So it's worked out very nicely.
And are you still directing all of them? Or?
No, I come out and look at them, and I help out with the casting. But actually, no, it's there's now teams of people who do
your production.
Who do that production, yeah, which is fantastic and very felicitous. But actually, weirdly about that TV casting, what I discovered is something quite interesting, which is that the audience, that star quality, is something that's as visible to a punter as it is to me. I can not spot all sorts of technical things in an actor that will make them suitable for any show I'm doing, but actually star quality beams out from a TV, and I think the people who voted for it, maybe the general public, could see exactly what I was seeing, and I could see exactly what they were seeing, and we really none of them made a mistake.
Because I saw it the night, I went one night...
Did you go to the live thing?
I saw it at the Palladium. The understudy was on.
Okay.
And she was absolutely wonderful. She was in floods of tears at the curtain call, because she was obviously worried that all the audience were here to see the winner. They all the whole audience stood to their feet,
Fantastic.
and it just proves what a great show it is.
Well, actually, that's not the production, that's The Sound of Music.
Yeah.
The Sound of Music is one of the greatest... Don't let anyone be rude about The Sound of Music. The people who wrote that piece had 200 years, literally 200 years of theatrical experience behind them. Rodgers and Hammerstein and Russell Krauss, they knew what they were doing. It's beautifully put together. Anyone who writes a musical, have a look at The Sound of Music. Don't get all sniffy and campy on it. Learn from the craft of that piece.
How the songs come back to mean
something
different.
How the in Act 2 of any musical you're going to have reprises, but the way those ones are done are so clever. I venerate Rodgers and Hammerstein, particularly the craft of Hammerstein. And of course the music of Rodgers, but my God, and everything that Sondheim is learned. But he obviously for obvious reasons. But in terms of craft and watching Gypsy, I really noticed this. Arthur Lawrence as well. That's the way bits of information are subtly put into the story in Gypsy. Very reminiscent of. I've just been watching Carousel, that's on here at the Academy as well. All this I've worked on Oklahoma and Carousel and King and I and Sound of Music, so that's almost all of the great ones. Not South Pacific yet, one day maybe. But to watch the way the information, for example, is just
bled through.
Oh, look at the first scene between the Mother Abbess and Maria. The words about mountains and singing. Just every other line has got a mountain in it or singing in it, because here is a song about singing to save your life and going across a mountain to save your life. It's set up, even in Carousel, just watching it the other day, Mrs. Mullins says, right at the beginning, she says, yeah, my dead husband, he should come back from the dead and hear you, he says to Billy Bigelow, which is exactly what happens in Act 2. And I'd never noticed it. It's like subliminal advertising. Yeah. It's just...
It's always like the best murder mysteries when sometimes the twist is given away in the first line.
The clues are there.
Yeah.
Another one is King and I, the very first scene on the boat. the word king is mentioned. God, is Louis, the kid says, is that the king? No, the king's coming. Is that the king? When will we meet the king? King. The next scene is an empty stage. A man steps on the stage, and we know who full well is who it is. It's the king, because we've been told, again, subliminally, for the last thing. The craft of that is quite astonishing.
Yeah. Do you think a lot of the new writers nowadays are deliberately breaking away from that, or what do you think of the quality of writing that you're seeing now for new musicals?
Well, I love it when people know their history, when people know their Sondheim. And it's interesting, I was talking to a young director yesterday. She said, she loves musicals. I wondered which ones, and we sort of, and I didn't get the impression she was massively familiar with the stuff that we're talking about. But I think she just liked it when everyone starts singing.
Because some people say it as though it's very camp and it's very silly and it's not necessary, but...
What's camp or silly?
The fact that someone will just burst into song. And it's all jazz hands, and that's their only image of
If you have a problem with people bursting into song, you have a problem with a great deal. I mean, is that any sillier than people speaking in blank verse, or being in a room with four walls, or,
Being alive?
Well, it's... I think if you have a problem, if you have a problem with people singing, I think you probably won't be listening to this podcast.
No, because we're about to burst into song right now.
Well, the point is that the wonderful thing is in life there are degrees of speech and wanting, and a song comes at a point when often words actually run out and emotions take over. It happens to all of us, like in a row with a partner, something like that. Eventually you're going to go, because you don't know what to fucking say. And the reason for that is, and if I was writing the musical of my relationship, I would say, there's your song.
Yeah.
Right there. And you can hear it Sondheim as well. Just immediately think of the end of Act 1.
And it'll be hinted in the first scene.
Yeah, of course it will. The end of Act 1 of Sunday Part with George. Tell Me Not to Go, that number. When that breaks out of a row, what shall I say? I don't know. What can you tell me? You can tell me not to go. Fantastic.
I mean, as musicians, I think Sondheim is the ultimate nerd's analytical thing, just to look at the Sondheim score and even the organ opening of Sweeney Todd, da 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 da, and you think, okay,
that's Joanna,
and then he puts da 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 da, and he does the Dies Irae over Greenfinch and Linnet Bird with the pedals going, and I mean that's the first 3 pages of Sweeney Todd.
Do you know where he got the idea from, though?
No.
It's actually taken from the Marasad. The original Peterborough production of Morissette, wonderful music by Richard Peasley, begins with an organ solo, absolutely similar, completely.
And I hate it when shows cut it out.
Yeah.
Because it's a musical.
Well, it's worth
puzzle.
It's a puzzle, but I mean, there's many more puzzles than that. All the information about Joanna and. But these are things that you get that he's not putting in like a crossword compiler, although he is a crossword compiler. He's not putting in for people to spot. He's putting in because that's the way it comes out. So, I mean, things that amaze me in Sweeney, for example, the judge who's supposed to be singing about Joanna when he's flagellating himself.
Joanna.
Yes, I see you at my window. So suddenly a woman. So when he actually, no other word for it, comes, and he does. The music we hear is dum ba dum ba dum ba dum, but we hear Lucy music. So he's wanking off over his daughter, but in fact thinking about his daughter's mother. You think, fucking hell, that's weird. That's fucked. But Sondheim will absolutely go there. Now, he's not setting nerds like you and me puzzles to spot these things out. It's absolutely how it comes out. If you've got that brain. If you're going to write Sweeney Todd, that's where it's going to be. It's going to be full of clues, detective story clues, the identification of the beggar woman as Lucy. The trouble with that, of course, is that we know the piece now. I mean, there might have been someone somewhere. I'll give you a great example. I saw Sweeney at the Châtelet in Paris a few years ago, and no one had ever seen it before. No one knew Sondheim, no one knew Sweeney Todd. It was a big ritzy opera thing. And when Mrs. Lovett said about the dead Pirelli, I know what we could do with him. And Sweeney goes, good, you got it? You remember that bit? The ad of cooking a person in pies. The entire audience went, oh, mais non, c'est pas vrai, mais non. They had no idea that was going to happen.
And then 8 French people went home and stole the idea.
That's right, yes, so several cafes are now opening.
Apparently that did happen in France, though.
You mean cannibalism is not just a British thing?
The other show that I absolutely adored I like all Sondheim, but the one that really had an effect on me was Merrily We Roll Along, because it's just such a clever, it's an incredibly heartbreaking piece to watch, isn't it?
Nothing is sadder than hope.
No.
Nothing is sadder than hope.
And to see these lives, get happier and happier, it's such a... But it was a play originally, wasn't it, that did that? So that's
Catherine
not...
Hart.
And musically, that's a wonderful puzzle as well, because I have a theory that the leitmotifs within the whole piece start forwards and to eventually get back, as if you were to turn the piece round.
That makes sense.
It would.
And that construction is actually the exact construction of Berg's lyric suite, and loads of other things like that. In back to the other Schoenberg we're talking about now. That's absolutely right. And that's why I slightly miss Behold the Hills of Tomorrow, because that's the first statement of that tune, which comes in so many guises. That we started out like a song, or Who Wants to Live in New York, depending on whatever it is. And that comes all over the place. I slightly miss that bookending of that. But...
Because the Maria Friedman's production didn't do that.
No.
Do you think there's a choice behind that?
There's no choice. You're not allowed to do the overt version. The only one that they're licensed now, the only one that publishers will license is the present version. So without The Hills of Tomorrow, that went a few years ago when James Lapine did a new version of it. So that's now gone. So you can't do that. So it's not allowed.
I think I'd like to see it as a film with two sets of cast, a young and an old cast. Do you think that would work?
It's funny, that one. I think it's such a theatrical idea, so maybe not. I think if you get someone who says, I'm now 40, and mind you get it all the time. If you go to any theatre, some person is saying, I'm 21, you think, really? All it needs to do, and it's true of all theatre, I think, is if it says, this is what we're doing, and you're consistent, then you'll believe it. And I think in that piece it says, I am playing myself older or now younger. I have to say, I thought Maria's was a wonderful production. I thought all those problems were solved, and I think it's been a mess for a long time. I didn't see James's production in Washington, which I heard was fantastic. But I've seen a few. I saw, that was one of my first Sondheim on stage experiences. The Manchester Library. This is just after it opened, and indeed the Guildhall. Ian Judge did a production at the Guildhall with Michael Cantwell in it, and that was fantastic. And in Manchester, I was working on Carousel at the time, and during rehearsals I went to see this thing so often. They gave me a free pass. I just went every night to see Merrily.
Every night, did you find something?
Not just every night. Ever since then, I've found different things in that show. All sorts of, and also in Sunday in the Park. In fact, all of them, I found new things in the same way, actually, that if you reread a book, I've got a few books you probably have as well that I've read and reread over my lifetime, and they seem different to me in every way as well.
And you learn more about life.
Absolutely.
You're able to pick up more about what other people learn about
exactly
life
right.
and write about.
Yeah.
Well, I'm looking forward to this musical tonight, Jeremy. Thank you for being on Musical Talk. I hear this is the very first time anyone respected in the theatre world has contacted me saying, I really like your show, please can I be on it, as opposed to me writing to them saying, I really like you, please be on my show.
Oh no, there is no other. There's Broadway Radio. Do they do the one on?
Yes, I'm actually going to be on Broadway Radio next week talking about Musical Talk. So.
Oh, fantastic! Well, that's terrific. I'm hooked on that one.
Yeah,
I'm a sort of podcast junkie anyway, but this one's fantastic.
But there's no British one, is there?
Well, there's you.
Yeah, and that's it.
There's you. It's absolutely fantastic. And what I love about it is the range, because I discover so much about fringe stuff.
Gilbert and Sullivan probably as well.
Gilbert Sullivan, I'm afraid, is my birthright. I've known about them since I was about 5. But actually, the fringe musicals, things like that, it's great, particularly when you play bits.
Do you believe with Foss's theory that W.S. Gilbert is the grandfather of the British music, of the book musical?
Yeah, I think it probably is. When you go and see this show tonight, which no one else will because it's the last night, you'll hear a lot of Gilbert and stuff. I totally grew up with it, and funnily enough, having seen Pirates of Penzance, the way lyrics become song is really, really interesting. But actually, it belongs to a different tradition. Funnily enough.
Jeremy, thank you very much, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
My pleasure.
So, Robert, I'm going to talk to you about Amour. We just heard from Jeremy Sands there. I really enjoyed the show. It's a lovely, charming musical, isn't it?
Yes, I thought it was enchanting in a way, and lovely music. brilliantly translated by Jeremy Sams. I think the lyrics are really witty.
How many of those clever lines are Jeremy's, and how many of them are from the original text? I always wonder that because the lyrics have to rhyme in the original language, don't they?
From what Jeremy said at the last night, there are a lot of rhymes in the original text, but of course, what that means is that he's got to find English words and English rhymes which are equivalent to hundreds and hundreds of French words and rhymes, and I think that is the skill of the translator. It's almost harder than being the lyricist yourself, exactly, because you have to work strictly to the meaning and the tone of the original, and yet you've got to invent and the rhythm, and you've got to invent new rhymes.
So bravo to Jeremy Sams.
Yes.
Phenomenal. I mean, there's one song in particular which stood out, where he was able to come up with all these rude words as if one of the characters had a stutter, which was absolutely brilliant. And I'd like to read those lyrics again, Jeremy, so if you're listening, do send them along. I think that was a highlight of the piece.
Yes, it was really a masterclass in lyric writing and rhyming.
Rhymes are us, you said.
Rhymes are us. I think that the music is. I mean, I always loved Michel Legrand, and I think that he's a great writer of musicals in some ways, and this is one of the French musicals sort of get lost in Anglo-American culture. Really, we haven't done them very well. Occasionally there was that production of The Umbrellas of Cherbourg, I think, Legrand's piece, which is a film, which was done in the West End by a theatre company. It didn't quite work. I think there's a very different sensibility.
Well, there's also The Umbrellas of Schoenberg.
Yes, well, it's Marguerite. I like Marguerite, and I like the production, but I think what doesn't really translate so well to our cultural expectations is these shows, by Legrand particularly, are charming, are whimsical, are witty, light as a feather. They're feather light, and I think that the trouble is, in the commercial musical theatre, one's always looking for one or two big show-stopping numbers, a production number, a big torch song or something like that. These shows don't really have that. This is another factor, I think, which is different to the English and American traditions. All of Legrand's shows, it seems to me, are through composed, and I think long before Lloyd Webber was through composing shows, I think Legrand was doing it in the 60s. So I think that's also the problem for me with Amour. I felt that, in a way, dramaturgically, it's a bit samey. It's always charming. It's always got lovely musical invention. It's always, as we said, the lyrics are witty all the way through. But it's like listening to a tone poem in a way. You're getting atmospheres and moods and commentary and narrative, but you're not getting the through rush of dramatic action. It doesn't have.
It's like listening to John Rutter's music.
Yes, there's the dramatic stakes don't seem very high, even though the story is very interesting. And I think that's something to do with the form that Legrand has chosen, this through composed form.
Do you think Claude Michel Schoenberg was influenced by Michel Legrand?
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure most people. I think most French pop songwriters are influenced both by Legrand and by Charles Aznavour. The thing is that I felt that at times it ran out of steam dramaturgically, and it was a bit samey.
It's too long as well.
Yes, it was a bit.
It should have ended at the happy moment.
Yes,
that's the American and British ending.
Yes,
and the French have to put a depressing ending on the end of it.
And I find that wry and rueful in a slightly clever French way, which is very sophisticated, but as with so much of French culture, for me, a bit chic. It's a bit clever to say, oh, we'll do the opposite thing, we won't give you the happy ending, when the happy ending was perfectly adequate. But I think that therefore there wasn't enough change of pace and mood for me. So in other words, if you were going to do this in a big theatre, or even in a reasonable medium-sized theatre in the West End, I don't think it would hold. I think it was, I must say, it was a triumph at the Royal Academy of Music, because the students were cheering and standing at the end.
You always feel that kind of not awkwardness, but false reaction when you're watching those sorts of shows, because there are groups of friends in to see their friends on stage. So when that particular friend has a big song, that group over there are gonna cheer and whoop, or they're gonna laugh at an in-joke or something like that. So you're not getting the real paid audience reaction, are you?
Groupies of friends.
Yeah.
No, that's true.
Throwing
But
their knickers at the stage.
that's true. But I think that there was a genuinely enthusiastic response. The performers were absolutely superb.
It's one of the best music schools in the world, so it was
Yes.
nice to see a musical that wasn't twanged, and it was nice to see a musical where they could actually sing it
Yes.
without that kind of musical theatre gloss that we see at the other drama schools.
The singing was exemplary. I thought the staging was a little bit too busy and too rushed and trying to be too inventive all the time. And I think that also detracted from the mood of the piece. I'd rather have had a more still production and listened, because there's so much to listen to in the lyrics and the music. They didn't need all that, and actually after a while the inventive choreography becomes a little cliched, though I did think it was inventive.
There's a beautiful moment where he walks through the wall for the first time. I thought that was stunning.
Yes, there were moments of stunning staging, I thought.
I felt lucky to have seen this production, purely just to have seen this production.
Yes, of course. You see a show whose craftsmanship is superb, and one's lucky to see that, because one gets so much. There's so much that does go on in the West End and on Broadway where the craftsmanship isn't this good. But I just don't think it will be done professionally in this country, not in the West End.
But sometimes it's better for it to be done at a school like that, because you're going to get possibly better singing than you would in the West End.
Yes, and it's the kind of show I could see doing very well in regional theatres.
You saw Gypsy again recently, didn't you? Do you want to
Well,
talk quickly about that?
I think that Imelda Staunton is phenomenal. I know everybody's said this, but I think I've always thought this was the King Lear of roles for women in the musical theatre, and I felt you saw that in her performance. She was so daring. She allowed her voice in the spoken parts to be so rough with anger and emotion and rage. I felt it was a searing performance, and I don't think we'll ever see a performance quite not of Rose quite like that again. I mean, I've seen a lot of the Gypsies. I didn't see Lansbury, but I saw her. I've seen a lot of material which you can see on YouTube from the production, and even Lansbury, as brilliant as she was, I don't think had quite the emotional engagement towards the end of the show as Staunton did. And she showed you an ordinary woman whose frustrations turned her into a monster. And I thought that was, somewhere around the end of Act 1, when you're in Everything's Coming Up Roses, when she turns to Louise and grabs her and turns her into a ventriloquist's dummy, you get the point of the whole story, that she's trying to make Louise her surrogate.
Well, Gypsy continues to play at the Savoy Theatre. It's extended until November. How the hell is she going to do that?
Well, one does worry for her, but I think she's probably worked out, I think with the singing, she's worked out very carefully where she's going to do a full belt and where she's going to hold back. I don't know about the acting parts, because I know I've been an actor myself, and I know it's very hard if you are in a show, for example, like King Lear, where you have to shout against a storm every night for 500 performances. Well, that does do bad things to your voice, but she seems to have her technique pretty well in control.
Robert Gordon, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Nick.